is our Lord Mayor, which is fantastic, Councillor Doreen Lee, which let's give her a big, well, we can't really hear each other, can we? But big round of applause. Thank you, Doreen, for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, Doreen's been the mayor in Bradford for how long now?
2 years.
2 years. And
Yeah.
she's passionate about community development and has given her career to serving the communities of the Bradford district. So over to you, Doreen.
Yeah, well, thank you everybody once again for inviting me. Thank you for all of you coming on today. I'm pleased, I really am pleased to honour the great work that the Foodbanks have done, and especially over this difficult year. The Trust World Trust, lockdown, lifelines and the long haul ahead reveal just how the coronavirus has affected the food bank use, with a huge rise in people needing to use the food bank and its network for the first time. And the findings have shown that. So the pandemic, half of the users have never had food banks before. 6 emergency food pilots were given out. I think it's given out per minute, which equates to 1.2 million food parcels between April 20 and September 20. And speaking of the peak of the pandemic, the food banks, I think they increased fourfold from what? Comparatives, I think they increased fourfold comparative to the figures that we had from February 2020. And independent food banks, they grew almost by 1,000. And children with families have seemed to have been the hardest hit. Incomes were helped with a £20 universal credit. Let's hope we can still get that, but that's where we are. During this webinar, we will hear from food banks across the Bradford district. And I know you're going to demonstrate how communities have come together, and I know you're going to show enormous resilience of how you've helped people, you know, over and above throughout this pandemic. We're going to hear from national and local networks, and thank you, Andrew Forsey from Feeding Britain for his support, and of course Cathy Haywood for her work locally in doing the food for Bradford, Feeding Bradford. We're also going to hear from in churches, Sue Duffy on a pilot for the credit union to help people progress from our food banks and get into a saving habit, which I personally think is a way forward if we can do that. You know, if we can just get people saving at 50 pence a week, it's something. It's something. So the pandemic has exposed the power of what happens when we stand together in the face of adversity. We celebrate all the hard work and the goodwill that's been shown in our communities and across this city. And once again, the people of Bradford and the district of Bradford have been a shining light. We've come forward and, you know, they're just fantastic. What keeps me going are the people of this district, because they are fabulous. So any help that we can give them, I'm there to support you, full stop. However, the furlong scheme is going to wind down, and of course we'll need to provide a suitable solution. Will the demand increase? That's another problem. I have a gut feeling it will. Once the furlong scheme is emptied, I do not envisage the pandemic just ending by a long way. I think it's something we'll learn to live with over the years, and help will always be needed. Can we look at a time when the service is no longer needed? And are there other food models that can help us? And of course, what's next for you for the food bank? All those are things that I know you're going to be discussing and hopefully come up with a solution. It's just so important for people who have nothing to know that there's something or somebody out there cares. You know, I can relate to quite a lot of it because I was born in the war and at the end of the war, and I came from an extremely large Irish Catholic family that had no money and whatever. I mean, and if my mother didn't have a pan of stew on the stove that started out with a little meat in at the end of the week was just gravy, vegetables might have been on Wednesday, with nothing else to eat. So it really is important. We're in the 21st century. We should never be allowed to go back to those days. And the people out there that are running these food banks, all of you, you're fabulous. You all deserve medals to me. I mean, if I were giving knighthoods out, I certainly know where I'd be giving them, and it wouldn't be to pop stars and sports stars or anybody else. But with that in mind, I hope you enjoy today. Listen to what's been said. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Well, I've been the Lord Mayor in this horrible pandemic, and I've seen some horrible things, I can assure you. You have all been there, and without you, I don't know where we'd have been. So, as I said, from the bottom of my heart, you probably won't hear from me again as Lord Mayor, because I finish in another 17 days, I think it is, something like that. Don't all cheer at once. But thank you, because I know what good work you've done, and I certainly will be spreading the word of the food banks in my next couple of years, just as a councillor. So thank you. I'll hand you back to Josie.
Oh, thank you so much. That's really fantastic, and hopefully everyone's really heard that. Thanks. So yeah, so just to you guys personally, just really receive that thank you from our Lord Mayor Doreen. Thank you, Doreen, for sharing that. And our next guest today is Andrew Forsey, who is the National Director of Feeding Britain. So he's going to come and give us a national perspective of what's been happening all across the country. So he is effectively Cassid Both, I guess. And Feeding Bradford and Cllr is one of 28 regional partnerships they have within Feeding Britain. So Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Josie. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for inviting me to share some of the attempts that are being made elsewhere in the Feeding Britain network to answer the question that's posed in the title of today's gathering, namely, what next for our food banks? It's a question that really from day one of Feeding Britain's creation 6 years ago, we've asked on an almost daily basis. Through those 28 regional partnerships you mentioned, Josie, across Scotland, England and Wales, Feeding Britain now represents more than 500 grassroots organisations, practically all of whom share our determination to halt, reduce and ultimately eliminate the emergency need for food banks in our country. And we want to do that by ensuring that everyone is able to access, afford and prepare the food they need without having to sacrifice other essentials. Now, over the next few minutes, I'll divide those attempts and answers, if I may, into 3 sections, covering the years prior to the pandemic, the past year or so during the pandemic, and then looking ahead to the kind of society we want to build as we emerge, please God, from the pandemic. But first, on that first phase, Feeding Britain owes its creation to an all-party group of MPs and peers who in 2015 wanted to create a vehicle that could identify, develop, nurture and accelerate innovative forms of community self-help and mutual aid which would prevent hunger and the need for food banks. The group also asked us regularly to share lessons and findings from that practical work on the sorts of policies and reforms that they should be championing in Parliament to address those underlying root causes of chronic poverty. Now, in preparing my remarks for today, I revisited some of the evidence received by the group at the time, including from here in Bradford, where, and I'm quoting here, we have had a food bank and hot food providers for decades. Traditionally, these would have met the needs of the long-term homeless, vulnerably housed, or those temporarily unable to provide for themselves or their families due to an unforeseen crisis. Separately, one of Bradford's food banks told us at that time that, quotes, in the first few years, we made up and gave out a few bags, no more than 200 a year, and this was to support those who weren't coping with family life, were ill, abandoned, addicted, or with mental health problems, and a small number adjusting to unemployment and crisis. But since then, there's been a strong structural change that has entrapped far larger numbers. And the quote ends there. And I think that particularly that final quote speaks to what most food banks told us back then, that what they were about was trying to help people with deep-seated, long-term, often very complex problems who had often fallen through the cracks in statutory services, and that they'd like to give what limited resource they had to those people, rather than constantly having to support growing numbers of people year on year who should have had an adequate income from work and or the benefit system. And indeed, it was those food banks in those early days who wanted to work with us and support ideas for minimising the level of demand, particularly from that latter group. And that's why Feeding Britain began to pilot, both with Feeding Bradford and Keighley and across the country, 4 evidence-based programmes to support children and families during school holidays, when the data showed a skyrocketing increase in the need for food banks, to bring specialist advocacy and casework services into food banks so that people's problems could be resolved quickly. A long period of no or low income could be averted, and we could help them forge immediate pathways from poverty. To give 2 weeks breathing space to people who couldn't afford gas or lecky so they could continue cooking food at home while getting back onto their feet and sorting out their bills. And to build affordable food networks that could support people on low incomes before they hit the crisis points that so often brought the need for food banks into play. More on that later. But next, there's a second section, which I can only really describe as the social Dunkirk of an emergency response that so many of you, as well as others across our network, mobilised a little over a year ago. Now think back to last March, and let's be honest, none of us knew what kind of terrain we were about to navigate, let alone what all of this would mean for the poorest and most vulnerable people in the communities that we serve. I recall my phone ringing each day in those first few weeks of lockdown 1, with practically all of our partners saying that their #1 priority was to shore up or bolster that last line of defence against destitution by sourcing, storing, packing and distributing emergency food boxes and cooked meals and parcels for almost anybody who asked for their help. It soon became apparent that the need for this emergency service derived both from a loss of work and a lack of income, as well as a whole range of issues around access and isolation that had been exacerbated by the pandemic. But the sudden outpouring of goodwill, generosity, and sheer guts and determination kept that emergency service going. Yet in recent months, a third section has been opened up, mainly due to our partners saying to us that the permanent giving of free food parcels on a mega scale can't be maintained until Kingdom Come, and nor should it be in their view. They said to us that it wasn't a sustainable service for them, and it's anything but for the families that we seek to serve. And so a key part of Feeding Britain's strategy for supporting people at the sharp end of both the social and the economic consequences of the pandemic is the development of those affordable food networks at the heart of each community. They've been proven to build resilience and prevent hunger by offering both nutritious food at a fraction of its usual price in a dignified environment, and by providing holistic support to households who are struggling but have yet to reach that crisis point. Now, Feeding Britain's work on this front in the development of those affordable food networks is twofold: working alongside our partners to build, to open and to run new citizen supermarkets from scratch, as we were privileged to do with Julie and Kathy at Shaw House in Bradford, and helping existing community centres, children's centres, food banks, church halls and other emergency food outlets begin to evolve into projects like social supermarkets, pantries, food clubs, all of which are welcoming and stigma-free. Our aim in doing so is to ease at least some of the pressure on households who, yes, are struggling to pay the bills and put food on the table, but to do so before the need for food banks or food parcels arises, by massively improving their access to affordable, nutritious food on their doorsteps. To date, the affordable food networks that have been set up and supported by Feeding Britain are saving more than 5,000 households a collective annual total of £2.1 million on their food shopping. And we're currently working with our partners on extending that layer of protection to tens of thousands more households in the months ahead. Each of those networks seeks to encourage self-reliance, achieve long-term self-sufficiency, and offer a sense of choice, dignity, and mutual support, while simultaneously providing a platform through regular evidence, data, and case studies, for example, for systemic change. And indeed, the recommendations that we've presented to government over the past 3 years, based on that evidence, have gained £2.5 billion in additional spending commitments for anti-poverty measures. But above all else, each network attempts to become that source of stability, security, employment and training opportunities, credit and savings facilities, and better health in their respective communities, while helping to shorten at least some of the queues for food banks. So the food banks themselves can, as I mentioned earlier, focus more of their support on the most vulnerable people with what limited resources they have. Each network also seeks to complement and include the provision that already exists within each community, whether longer established or relatively new, so that we can avoid any unnecessary overlap and achieve a more coherent, cohesive service. And indeed, those networks are fast becoming a vehicle for the pooling and the sharing of resources between a large number of projects who share a common goal. Now, while I'm the last person to pretend that this is the be-all and end-all, or the panacea, or a silver bullet in any way, the model is beginning to make a tangible difference to people's lives in a sustainable way. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from Julie and others later on as to how that's beginning to pan out in Bradford. And so as each of us reflects on what we've heard today, what we've learned over the past year and a bit, and what we feel duty bound to do next in support of our communities, I really hope that this movement from relief to recovery to resilience, as well as the spirit of both adding to and drawing upon mutual support within a broader network of organisations and providing dignified support for the people we serve, may guide at least some of our answers to that question, what next for our food banks? So again, thank you for inviting me to contribute, but more importantly, to listen to the rest of today's proceedings.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew. That's really insightful, especially like your emergency Dunkirk analogy. But yeah, we can't stay in the crisis war moment forever, can we? So that's what today is about. And now I'm going to hand over to Julie from In Churches, who I'm sure loads of you will know, having had In Churches fans turn up at your food banks throughout the crisis. And Julie's just going to tell us a little bit about the local picture about what's been going on. So Julie, take us away.
Thanks, Josie. So in early March of 2020, Cathy Henwood and myself were called to a meeting at the council just to see how we could potentially support food banks in the face of a potential pandemic. And at the time, as the stark reality was hitting, we were taking a stock of where we were, and we were anticipated that we'd be forced to close. I must admit, after a tough winter, we were thinking, oh, 2 weeks off, this is going to be fantastic. But we actually, you know, had a readdress of what we were doing and some quick planning and some discussions between staff and trustees. So we accepted the challenge and remained open. And it was quite interesting in the first few weeks because Bradford's was just empty. There was not a soul around. It was really interesting. So the following few months, which sort of, it was how long was a piece of string, because we just didn't know when the end was in sight. So what we were asked to do was to purchase food to support the food banks, with a view that you know, we would be able to get some of the stock quicker. Our work over the following months included things like liaising regularly with the council to coordinate the food provision across the 21 to 28 food banks that were coming forward for food. We had to purchase stock to sufficient levels to fulfil the orders. We met with a lot of VCS services and food banks to ensure that demand was met. We prepared meals and food parcels for homeless guests that are being placed in hostels. So that was about 60 meals a day for them, delivered to the NHS and emergency services. We were liaising weekly with Bradford and Cllr to ensure that, you know, we were trying to capture what was going on with the increase, to try and make sure that nobody was going hungry. On top of that, we ordered PPE, and you know, for a lot of people that was felt like quite a long time coming. And there was a horrific moment when I realized that people were I thought I was talking in individual, how many face masks do you want? And instead of 250 boxes, they'd ordered 250,000 boxes. Luckily the supply line wasn't there, so we ended up with 6. But yeah, it was quite a challenge. And then we had regular meetings with Andrew Forsey and Feeding Britain and his team to feed back into the wider strategy and plans. And as you know, in those early days, it was chaotic, wasn't it, Josie? There were so many food lines that were not available. Tinned meat, we couldn't get hold of that for love nor money, and pasta sauce. And we tried to say, you know, can you have some chopped tomatoes instead? You know, the food banks that was used to giving out pasta sauce, like, no, we need pasta sauce. A lot of the food banks that were used to purchasing food for the clients were really limited in the amounts that they were able to take. And, you know, there were obviously the baskets weren't there in Tesco for collections as well. And then what happened for us, which was quite challenging, was when DEFRA rolled out their shielded food parcels for those that were self-isolating, so many lines had already been commandeered by the top 5 wholesalers. So it was really challenging. We'd see a Morrison's van pull up outside and go, fantastic, this is our order, and we'd end up with 3,000 tins of soup instead of baked beans that we'd ordered. So it was a challenge for, I think I kind of likened it to a juggernaut going down the A1 and then being told that they needed to turn back and trying to do a 3-point turn in the road. Food was out there, but it just wasn't coming to us. We found that so many organisations stepped up and supplied and distributed food, and hats off to Morrison's, because they were one of the key supermarkets who pledged support. Feeding Britain, we've managed to commandeer 25 tonnes for us. And there was an amazing moment when an articulated lorry pulled up outside and had 17 pallets of egg and milk mix. And we'd ordered, I think we'd ordered 4, but other organisations had said, oh no, we can't take all that. So we were the last drop, and trying to get 17 tonnes of egg and milk mix out and then try and distribute it across the network was a challenge. Fair Share distributed, I don't know if you've been looking at figures, but they distributed about 345 tonnes to 37 of you across the city, which was the equivalent of about 820,000 meals. The Broadway hub that were delivering the shielded parcels gave out about 14,000 parcels. We ourselves gave out about enough food for 860,000 meals. But all of you sitting there that did the stuff outside this will actually never know the true value of the work that you've done. We've tried to capture as much as possible that we can, but you know it's quite a big unknown, and you know yourselves how much food you've given out. And again, big hats off to you, because Foodbanks provided such a vital lifeline. And I think in Bradford, Doreen mentioned at the start, I don't think if we had had the network and the goodwill that we'd have had, that, you know, quite a lot of people would have been in a lot more uncomfortable situations, because what we did in February was 4 times as much at the height of the pandemic. Massively pop-up food banks and meal providers started up. Some just were for the immediate crisis, the first few months. Others have been gradually establishing themselves among the ranks of Bradford and Cllr's food banks. We had hundreds of volunteers came on board, which was really exciting, because Traditionally, a lot of the faith groups have provided a large number of volunteers, but what we were seeing across the city was that so many volunteers came on board to support, many of them volunteering for the first time, and you know, a lot of them have been furloughed, and with them came resource, because, you know, hands up, those of you that are a little bit, I'm 37 myself. That's all I'm admitting to, but you know, it's quite challenging for some of us that are a bit older, pointing to myself. So we got some very active people that to join us, which was fantastic when you're moving so much food. Interestingly enough, when we had the environmental health officer in earlier on, back in January, they were saying they have got 500 new businesses to inspect in the next few months. So I think some of the organisations that stepped up to provide food have seen that there's been a need, and sort of certainly about 11 that I'm aware of out of the 500 have gone on to make a business for themselves from this. So it's great when many of the established food banks have increased the capacity to have the enthusiasm of the new groups taking some of that burden. And sometimes some of the food banks were reporting that they were a little bit down on their numbers because there were so many people helping out. But I know that the traditional food banks are really keen to share why and what they do, and share their knowledge and experience and their years of experience to help people move on from this crisis. Doreen alluded to the fact that so many people have been pushed into the food insecurity, often for the first time. And I think the past year has highlighted just how fragile the social safety net is after years of austerity. But yet for me, who've been in the food arena for a long time, I think this has given us an unprecedented insight into the problem that people are facing, and it's brought huge attention to the issue.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to have to wrap you up shortly, Julie.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. But we'll be hearing from you in a bit later as well, won't we?
Yeah, thank you.
Which is awesome. No, thank you so much, Julie. And you guys with your vans dropping food off to all of us was just so massively appreciated. And all that work you did to actually physically buy food and get food when the whole world wanted pasta, you managed to get it and deliver it to us. So that is awesome. Thank you, Julie, for telling us the local picture. So now we're going to we were going to have 3 food banks, like existing food banks, but unfortunately Josh, as from Cllr Foodbank Salvation Army, has also had a bereavement in the family. Suddenly his grandfather's died, so he won't be able to speak to us. So I'm going to kick us off talking about Bradford Central, and then Graham Walker from Bradford Met Food Bank is going to follow me. So there's just a short film I think Theo is going to bring up and show as a bit of an intro to us, if that's all right, Theo.
It was always one of the busiest food banks in Yorkshire, but over the past 5 weeks the demand here at Bradford Central is the highest it's ever been.
Before lockdown we were sort of helping 50 to 60 families a week, and now we're doing about 200 families.
Why do you think there's so much more demand?
I think at the beginning it was people physically, you know, couldn't leave the house, and then now having lots of people in the house, so you're trying to live on your really low benefits, which people are kind of on a knife edge anyway, and just one thing just pushes people over the edge. So I think this has pushed a lot of people over the edge, obviously.
They've had to move to bigger premises since lockdown, but instead of people coming here to collect food parcels, volunteers are delivering to people's homes. Today they're taking food to a single mum and her young daughter. She's living in accommodation for asylum seekers and struggling to afford food and nappies. She relies on the food bank.
They've brought food for me twice now, but you know, I don't know if I should keep calling them every time. I don't know how it works.
How much more difficult has it been the last few weeks since the lockdown?
Everyone is just overwhelmed. We don't know what to do. We just stay inside, and we don't have a garden, and the room is small, it's tight. The baby can't play, the baby can't do nothing. Most times I cry because of my situation.
They're among more than 1,000 families supported by the food bank since lockdown, with Bradford having one of the highest rates of child poverty in the country. Today, a head teacher has arrived with a minibus to collect food for families who are now having to stay at home.
For some families that has been very difficult. I think it's been a real challenge. I think it's been a real challenge in terms of keeping families happy, healthy and safe. And for some families, I think it's been a real challenge just in terms of managing the day-to-day. The food bank has been a really important source of support for those families and a really important source of support for us as a school.
They're handing out more than 5 tons of food a week here at the moment and doing it as safely as they can. It is not easy, but the volunteers are trying to make sure, despite a lockdown, people in this city will not go hungry.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Emma Glasby, BBC Look North, Bradford.
Cool. Yeah, so that was yeah, as she said, about 5 weeks after the pandemic started, and we're not doing that much food now. So yeah, so our pandemic journey, I guess, was that yeah, pre-lockdown we were sort of helping 500 people a month, and then it shot up to like 2,500 in that April, and then just kind of dipped off a bit. And so now we're sort of feeding I think December, yeah, we've about 1,000 or 1,500 people a month. So yeah, it's gone down a lot, which is great. But yeah, still probably double, just a bit over double what we would normally be doing. And I guess we don't want to stay at that capacity. We want to get to a place where, again, when we are helping people overcome the root cause of their food crisis, which is kind of what today's seminar is about, really. So just to tell you a little bit about how we work, we are one of 3 Trussell Trust food banks in the city. So there's us doing the central postcodes, and then there's also Bradford North and Wyke Food Bank amongst all of that. And yes, we're a Trussell Trust food bank, and we're hosted by the Light Church, and we give away 3-day emergency food parcels plus fruit and vegetables, and we also have rebooted our halal parcels, so they're much better now with lots of chapati flour and things like that, which is really cool. But we work through a referral process, so we have about 650 referrers from across all social services and doctors and schools, and just loads of amazing charities out there, aren't there, that refer, which is awesome. So people that are working closely with people, they know those families are hungry and that they're in an actual crisis. It's not just about creating a dependency, giving people a bit of extra food every week. They're in a food crisis, something's happened, which means that they can get a food parcel from us. And when they come in, we obviously give them the food, but then we also want to kind of help them with the root cause of the problem, which is why some people just need food, and there's certain things, like if they're waiting for their 5 to 6 week benefits, and that's like, okay, right, fine, have your food parcels, but there's other issues that people might have that have actually caused that crisis that you can potentially help people solve with a few phone calls, a bit of advocacy on people's behalf, signposting to other organisations that are specialists in debt advice. We also have a benefits advisor from Girlington Advice Centre called Cllr, who comes in every Friday and offers benefits advice, because often that's the root cause of the problem for people. And yeah, and I guess that's kind of our thing that we want to do. We want to help people take the first step out of poverty, and kind of the food bank parcel is just kind of dealing with the crisis. But the main thing is to chat to people, you know, people, there's so many reasons why people are in that situation, and there is quite often something you can do extra to help people take that step. So I guess that's kind of our approach. Just checking I didn't to say anything else, but yeah, so that's kind of, yeah, that's what we do, and that's our approach. And yeah, we've got lots of volunteers, which is awesome, and they're all fab, and we run on great volunteers too that do lots of different jobs. And when we're not in COVID, we cook meals for people, so they can sit down and have a nice experience too. And my vision for the future really is that we'd be helping less people, but more in depth. So when people can come in for a meal, they can get help. What I've just received, all our signposters, our People that meet and greet people and give the parcels have got extra training from Girlington Advice Centre. We've just spent 8 weeks getting quite in-depth training to really help people with those root causes too. And so that's kind of my vision for the future, that we would have more like a cafe vibe happening, where people can really come in and get the in-depth support as well as the emergency food parcel. So that's us. And now I'm going to introduce you to Graham Walker from Bradford Metropolitan Foodbank. Graham retired 9 years ago and has kept himself very busy by being a volunteer for Bradford Met, and has been acting chair of the charity since March 2020, and is a great guy, and we get on really well and we've worked together well. So Graham, do you want to take us away? Tell us about Bradford Met.
Yes, indeed. Okay, I'll briefly give you the past, present and future for the Bradford Metropolitan Foodbank. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. I don't know how I did that. Never mind. Okay, start again. Before March last year, essentially the food bank was run by 3 people who had been running it for quite some time, and credit them for that, but they were resistant to change. They were unable to delegate or let go, and we really were not fit for purpose at all. They had to isolate as soon as lockdown started, which meant that others on the food bank committee could step in to be empowered and enabled to adapt the food bank to meet the incredible demand that we were then facing. So in a sense, we grasped opportunity out of adversity. How we operate is that we work through third parties. We don't normally have contact with vulnerable people. We work through the welfare agencies, social services, housing agencies, health workers, trusted voluntary organisations, organisations working with refugees, asylum seekers, and some other food banks. And we supply food to those people, and they collect from us and deliver to their clients, their customers, and the vulnerable people that they represent. They register with us, and then they get allocated times to collect food for their people in order for us to maintain social distancing and keep the numbers in our place to a minimum. We, in order to deal with the demand, we've now had to get in a part-time coordinator, and we are very dependent on a small army of very brilliant volunteers. Brilliant not only because they do what they do to pack and to sort, but also we have amongst our number a nutritionist and an epidemiologist as well, which helps us incredibly in terms of the quality of what we give out. In 2019, the last normal year, we gave out 12,000 3-day bags of emergency food. In 2020, pandemic year, we gave out 20,000, an increase of around 67%. And we think, well, no, we know that about 30% of the bags that we give out currently are halal bags. So we know that we're serving the multicultural district-wide community. And we've adapted so that in terms of our health and safety procedures, our environmental health, we were inspected and we got 5 stars. And in terms of maintaining social distancing regimen, we actually work very well. So looking towards the future, some optimism, some pessimism. Optimism specifically in terms of this food bank, because I think that it is very effective, it is very efficient the way we run, and we think that if need be, we could actually increase our capacity, if need be. We know that, you know, because of the funding that's been available, the numbers of food banks have risen, which has been particularly good. But the future for us is, I think, this, that funding packages are diminishing. And another problem is that in the eyes of people, food banks are closely associated with the pandemic. There was a good article in the TNA today, and Josie was widely quoted in that. It's online. I don't know if it's in the actual paper, which was talking about the way food banks have risen to meet the demand. And it's all about the pandemic, and it has nothing at all to do with Brexit. Brexit is not even mentioned. Our future, I think, is that in July, the furlough will stop. In October, unless the government has a change of heart, and I don't think the government has a heart, the universal credit could well be cut. In October, there'll be greater regulations regarding imports and exports, which is around Brexit. And in January, border checks begin in terms of imports and exports. In terms of imports and exports, the current thinking is that the volume of imports and exports will be reduced by something between 35 and 75%. What that means in terms of exports is greater job losses. And in terms of imports, it means that the availability of food will be less, that there could well be food shortages, and the price of food will go up fairly significantly. So I think that's the future that we are facing. I think that this particular food bank is capable of dealing with that demand, but we know that there are issues around food banks in terms of creating dependency, in terms of the self-esteem and the mental health of vulnerable people, and we need other ways of supporting our most vulnerable, which I believe that we're going to address in the next few minutes. So that's where we're at. It's not a optimistic outlook whatsoever. Although the pandemic, the crisis around the pandemic may diminish, the crisis around Brexit and food poverty in general, I think is certainly not going to diminish anytime soon. So sorry to be depressing, but that is, the way that we see it right now. Back to you, Josie.
Thank you for that, Graham. Yeah, lots to think about on there in the future. Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And on that note, we are going to hand over to Julie Thompson again and Councillor Sue Duffy. We're going to be looking at Food Savers, which is a project to support food banks and free food provision by combining sustainable low-cost food markets with easy to access to a credit union as part of a wider food support. So Julie and Sue are going to explain it much better than I just did. So over to you guys.
Are you able to view my screen there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what my son-in-law, some of you might have heard me say this, used to say was the best thing to come out of Bradford is a 72 to Leeds. And working in Bradford for so long, I completely don't believe him. You're all doing a remarkable job. And what we've done is we've been working with, for about the past 6 years, putting mini markets into community groups and working with different communities. But what somebody's got a little, could I ask you to mute if that's okay? So what we've sort of been developing over the past few months is something called the Food Savers Network. What's that, I hear you say? So the pop-up pantry model is not a new concept. There's quite a lot of pop-up pantries all around the country. And most of you know that credit unions have been around a long time. But what we've done in churches, we've decided to look at combining the two. And actually, it's causing a little bit of a stir. We've heard that, we feel that people should have a right to food. We've seen so many people coming to us. They're really anxious where the next meal is going to come from, which is staggering. We know that, not eating healthily leads to a lack of concentration. Eventually, that can lead to ill health. long-term medical interventions are at the wider end of the scale. And our mantra is food for health, not wealth. I was interested to see that Tesco made £371 million during the pandemic. And it's just like, you know, we should be feeding people, not feeding shareholders. And we talk a lot about affordable food. And what do we mean by affordable food? Well, it's the actual cost of the food, but it's also dependent on the availability, and it's also dependent on the family income. So how can we make food either more affordable for the families that we're feeding? Part of the work that we do is we recycle, reuse, not recycle food, but we rescue surplus food. But for a lot of the work that we do, we're realizing that, you know, we don't want to create a dependency on our services. How can we empower people and help them move on? I think J.D. Rockefeller said it nicely, that charity is injurious unless it helps the recipient become independent of it. So what did we do? We opened a social supermarket thanks to Feeding Britain. They supported us with, back in, I've forgotten when, in opening a social supermarket. And we thought we would charge £6 for members to use this. And then the thought was like, well, £1 of that, what if we saved £1 of that? And then every 6 weeks we gave them a free bag of food. And because Carlsberg don't make credit unions, but if they did, we knew a chap called Ian Brewer. And so I approached Ian back in October and said, Ian, what do you think? If we give you £1 of this, could you invest it in the credit union? And he's like, oh, let's have a think about that. So this is what happened. And hopefully you can see this.
The social supermarket is the next level up on the food ladder from the Foodbank. So we've been working with a lot of organisations that have been giving away free food, and we know that food isn't free. So what we've done is taken the pop-up pantry model, and we've combined that with the credit union to offer choice to people, to give them dignity, to enable them to be financially inclusive if they want to join that.
So the membership scheme, they pay £6 for the shopping. They would then sign up and join credit union. We would then invest £1 of the £6 into the credit union to start them off on the ladder of saving.
So one person in particular who, when he got to £8 in his savings account, he says that's more than I've ever saved in my life.
We feel that everybody's got the right to fresh, affordable food, and for some people that are struggling at the moment, the idea of being able to choose their own food is really empowering for them.
If they get a certain number of the fruit and vegetables, so we will give them at least 8 different fruits and vegetables. They then get whatever fresh stuff that we have. So sometimes we have milk, sometimes we have cheese or eggs or butter, just depending what we have. And then they go along and they get about another 6 items of things like pasta and bread or teas, anything like that. And then finally, we have what we call our treat table.
Additional to the social supermarket, there's a lot of wraparound care, so that could be debt advice, that could be budgeting, that could be volunteering opportunities, advice and support, and there's member benefits such as haircuts, cookery classes and things like that.
We will look at how we can train them up or give them enough knowledge to be able to make a lovely meal out of the ingredients that we've got.
People have a choice, and that gives them dignity, actually. So rather than just being given some food, which is important, and Foodbanks is still really important, it's like the next level. That when people really struggle to find enough money to be able to go to a supermarket, this is giving them good quality, healthy food that they can then go home and cook for their family, and they can have a choice about what they eat.
Our vision is to grow a network of food savers, so where members have dignity and choice and self-respect and feel empowered to make their own choices about the good food, and they've also got opportunities to learn new skills and serve as a member in a recognised credit union scheme. So at the moment we have 4 or 5 organisations in Bradford that we currently work with that have come on board with that, and then we've got a further 5 or 6 that want to join up as well.
So the 4 pillars that we've identified from that is dignity, empowerment, behaviour change and financial inclusion. And although we've not got a massive amount of people saving with a credit union at the moment, the outcomes are just amazing. One lady, I think as you saw in the film, one of the gentlemen had saved £14. That's the most he's ever saved. One of the ladies has saved £100. And she said, I'm addicted to this. I'm really addicted. Can I give you another couple of pounds? And what they're doing is that £6 that they're paying us, if they can afford it, they're just topping up by little incremental amounts. And this one particular lady has said she's not redecorated in 20 years, but the fact that she's saved some money, she's been able to buy a big tin of paint and redecorate her house. And she said, trouble is, she said, it's all white, and she said, I feel like I'm sitting in Linfield Mount. But it did make a big difference to her. And we've been working with Councillor Duffy here. And, you know, can I pass on to you, Councillor Duffy?
You certainly can. So,
working.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm not muted. I'm asking to get myself muted quite a lot.
Yeah.
So I started off on this journey working with Ian and looking at the rollout across the ward that I work in around the credit union. And through the work with Ian, we looked at how we could get more people signed up to the credit union and applied for a small grant to be able to do that. And that grant meant that we could, for people who really needed it, and they would have to show that they needed it, and they would be able to have their initial join-up fee paid through the grant. There's lots of benefits to that. We've been working with schools around that as well. So because, you know, when we're looking at loan sharks, etc., all of the kinds of things that really take the toll on people who are living in poverty in the first instance, it just exacerbates it. So that's where it started. And then Ian said, well, I'm working with Julie. And in Ollerton in particular, we've got a fair share. And so we've looked at that and thought, oh, okay then. So how can we make the transition from the fair share into food savers, utilising some of the small grant that we received to help people sign up? And that's where our relationship started. And then because we, from a council's point of view, was looking at trying to roll this out further, because you can see the benefits of joining the credit union. What we've managed to do now is partner both with Julie to roll out the food saver side and Ian to roll out the credit union side across the district. And we're hoping to be on that journey fairly soon to be able to support people to actually join up to the credit union with that initial sign up fee across every ward, and also to support, because I know Julie's really busy working on how and all of the mechanisms that need to be in place to make sure that people saving through the food savers is right and proper and secure. And so that's where we are at the minute, and we're trying to support both sides to roll that out. And we're hoping that that's going to mean a significant transition. And as Julie said, through the videos, you can see the social supermarket side, but there's also how you can transition to food savers when you are looking at a fair share model as well. So I think that's all from me. Julie, do you want to pick it back up?
Yeah, I think it can. It's not that. The hope is that Food Savers becomes a quality mark rather than, it's not in churches trying to brand anything. So if any organisations want to come alongside and, they've already got an existing food offer, we're developing a platform to be able to roll this out. Because once you start taking money from vulnerable people and telling them that you're going to put some of that away, you have to put that away. So we're working with, I don't know if he's on the line today, but we're working with a fintech platform provider to be able to administer this really well, and there'll be a handbook as well. So yeah, we're currently interviewing in we've just been interviewing in Cllr for a worker, and that hopefully will be rolling that out to Cllr as well. So it's really interesting, and I guess what Graham was saying earlier about people, we just don't know what people are until we see the whites of their eyes, what mess they're in. And we as much as we can, as a community, we'd like to help support people. Ian, did you want to say anything? Ian Brewer? I know he's in the background.
Is it there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you very much. Absolutely. I mean, Julie, you and I, how long have we been working together? 10 years, something like that?
I think.
Yeah, longer than we care to remember. But when you came to me with this idea, and it's just a powerful way. I mean, the council's been fantastic in supporting the credit union, starting the credit union, but also paying for my role, and we acknowledge that, and being able to work then with Councillor Duffy on the council side, with Julie in the community side, and be able to come up with a scheme that's just so powerful. Andrew Forsey and Robert Kelly from Abcl, these people have recognised that we've got something quite special here. And I think this is part of the spirit of innovation that comes out of Bradford that we're all very, very proud of. And it's just being able to link together and roll that out further. Got colleagues from Cllr that are interested in this model too. And we can see how this works and goes forward. So I really want to thank you both for the work you've put in. And I think we've got something quite special here.
Thank you.
So
that's fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, just listening to because I've heard you talk about it, Julie, but just seeing that presentation, yeah, it's just really inspiring and giving me ideas, making me think, well, what can we do in Bradford Central? So yes, I'm going to hand over to Ian now to talk through questions. I don't think we've really got many questions on the chat. So yeah, so I guess this now, like we've obviously talked at you for about an hour, which has been amazing and fantastic. But now this is kind of where it's going to be interactive. So this is over to you to make it awesome. So yeah, let's make it as interactive as possible. There's no stupid questions. Honestly, we're here for you. This is for you guys. So let's make it as useful as possible. And yeah, I'm going to hand over to Ian.
Thank you. Well, a big thanks to Josie. When I first met Josie in talking about this, I recognized that she would be able to help us move things along really well. And you've kept us to time remarkably well. So, huge round of applause for that. But I welcome anybody to put in questions. So please feel free to do that. We can't see everybody, so I can't jump in and ask you individually. So feel free to put that in. If you can just put it in capital letters, it helps us to identify questions. But really what I want to do is just pick up straight things through. And actually, I'm going to just come to Theo. Theo, you're part of Wellsprings. Not all of us know about Wellsprings and what you do and what Kathy does. She'll be here to give a role. Can you tell us a bit about Wellsprings and Kathy's role?
I can, yeah. Well, I'll speak about Kathy. She's more interesting than I am. Many of you will know her already, and the work of Feeding Bradford as one of the pilots of Feeding Britain has been shared earlier on. And for those of you who don't know Kathy, her role is all about kind of coordinating and helping to bring together these kind of ideas in a kind of a cohesive way. And if you're not connected in with Kathy, if you perhaps will, when we send out the recording for this event afterwards, it'd be really great if you could just get in touch with Kathy and let her know about your provision and what you're doing, and she can help connect you into to some of the people that you've heard from today, and some of the initiatives happening. So we're really, really grateful at Feeding Bradford for all the, as been said already, the remarkable work that you've done, not just over the past year, but over many years, and very grateful to be able to support it in whatever ways that we can. So thank you, Ian. On mute again, Ian.
The tattoos across my head, it really ought to be. Graham, can you tell us a bit more about your food bank and what you've seen in relation to the type of people that use your food bank and what needs they've had?
It's a bit of a tough one because we don't actually make direct contact with most of the vulnerable people. We have some consistent third parties who we know come to us on a weekly basis and pick up 30, 40, 50 bags, the Bridge Project being one, Horton Housing being another, who are two of our biggest users, if you like. It's hard to say. There are one or two smaller food banks that we've been able to supply because we are when I say, well, we're not cash rich, but we are better off at this present moment because of the generosity of people in the Bradford community. And so we've sourced food for one or two other smaller food banks, and I think because we now have a more effective way of doing our business, I would say that, well, actually before lockdown last year, we gave out standard bags of food. There were no halal bags, there were no vegan bags, and we are now able to, with advance notice, to supply appropriate food parcels. Fantastic. For the people who need it. So as I said before, I think we about 30% of the bags that we give out are now halal bags.
That's really great to hear. I'm actually going to launch out and just try something here. If you are in the audience and you've got a question, if you can unmute yourself and wave your hand frantically, I'm going to see if we can do a bit of audience participation here. I can't see everybody on one screen, so Theo could probably help me. But if you've got one, just wave your hand on that. Okay, well, I'm going to jump.
There's a couple in the chat, isn't there, Ian? Have you seen those? Yeah. If I share one, there was Julie, there's a question to you from Cheryl. If you had to put a cost on it, what were the approximate startup cost to putting in place a vibrant pop-up pantry space, staff, volunteering expenses, etc.?
Sorry, I'm muted. So, Cheryl, thanks for asking that. Well, for the social supermarket, we received funding from Feeding Britain for kitting out, so that was quite a big expense. But the I reckon you could start doing the pop-up pantry from about £500. And there has been, Andrew will nod his head somewhere, Feeding Britain have offered, if you set up Food Savers, that they would put some funding into that, so for startup costs. But I haven't done a breakdown by breakdown, but that's something I could very much do and pass on to Andrew.
There was a nod from Andrew.
Could I just add to that? Could I just add to that? With some of the rollout that where we're partnering, we're looking at potential to support the transition from food banks into, for fair share. And so at some point in the future, when everything's ready to roll out more fully, there will be some support for food banks that want to actually transition, with that initial fair share cost sign up. So just to put that out there as well.
Sorry, Sue, I didn't know whether that was common knowledge yet.
Yeah, well, it will be when everything's ready to roll out. Yeah, well, it's all about, isn't it, making sure that everything's ready to be able to roll out, and that's where Julie and Ian come in really, and they'll just take it from.
I'm going to just ask a question for Cheryl down in Cllr. Cheryl, we've been working together with Dalton together. What's happening down in Cllr that you're aware of? And Pretty might be here as well.
On call as well. I mean, we have obviously the larger food banks like yourselves in place that are providing that crucial service. But certainly in Dalton Together, we've just explored almost a mini version of what Julie's doing. It's not like a little mini shop or supermarket, but it is a community cupboard. So literally 24-hour access with some essentials that people can just go at any time of the day or night to pick up key things like bread, pasta, long life milk, rice, whatever. So we've just started that process, and then now we're looking to think about how we might evolve not just those cupboards, but also but maybe sort of create almost like Julie's pantry, like mini little community shop from our food bank. So we keep the food bank, but we also have the community cupboards, and then we also have community shop where we can get the credit saving activity built into that as well. So that's where we're at the minute, alongside lots of community growing, food sharing type activities as well, just to sort of wrap around some of that food agenda really, to make people think about food and growing food and sharing food in different ways as well, and cooking projects, community cooking projects, things like that as well, just to build skills and confidence with some of our families and residents.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Cheryl. It's great working with you and Pretty. Thanks for joining here. Louise Mann over at in BD5. I know you're representing Shine. Can you tell us some of the people that we started with you as a pilot for this credit union model? Can you tell us some of the people that have come through and started saving with you?
As Sarah was shown in the video, so she's stolen some of the best lines, but yes, we've had people who haven't saved before be able to start savings accounts, so and regularly attending pop-up pantry as a result of that, because they know that they're regularly saving as well. So those two things going together, and with pop-up pantry generally, the fact that we've had people that we've been working with for a really long time about budgeting, and actually they have voluntarily organise their budgeting by paying in advance for pop-up pantry. So they are then doing budgeting without realising it, because they've paid their 4 weeks in advance of pop-up pantry and credit union, which is huge, because then food is sorted for all of that time, and which has been such a huge encouragement really. And people have continued to put in really without drawing out as far as we can see, which is also encouraging to know that it's saving that is there, what's going forward for them. And also what's been really important in this time, but always important, is the relationship. It's not like shopping at Morrison's, it's not like interacting at the bank. There's a relationship that goes with that.
Yes, there is.
And all the well-being alongside that, and we're able at Shine to connect into other things as well, which is really encouraging. But yeah, so I think that answers your question, Ian.
No, it certainly does, Louise. Absolutely it is. And then I'm going to come to Alan Hignett, who's joining us from over in Hull. Alan's part of ABCOR, which is the Association of Credit Unions. Robert Kelly, the CEO, was meant to be here. He sent his apologies. He's caught up on something else. But Alan, from a wider credit union national perspective, do you think that this has options outside of what we're doing in Bradford?
Anybody's been looking at me, I've been writing reams and reams, and then I disappeared for a bit while I had to go and have a...
You're a bit muffled there, Andrew, Alan.
It's better if I'm, because I was in listening. I'm in listening mode, so I put the... That's a new one, isn't it? No, for credit unions, it's an absolute no-brainer. Why wouldn't we want new customers? Why wouldn't we want to reach those that are difficult to reach? Because credit unions are great you know, a lot of credit unions are connected with people who are in their work. But for people who are not in work, you have to find your credit union. So it's a lot easier. This really sparks me off. Why wouldn't we want to work with people who are desperate? Because we've all been there,
yeah,
one time or another. You know, when anybody asks me about credit unions, I always answer, where were they when my kids needed new shoes in the 1970s? But we're not in the 1970s, and we have credit unions now. So that's my answer, really. I'm wondering, you know, we're about to start working in a new town that is nameless at the moment, but I would like to find out what's going on there. I can see a joint credit union food shop on the horizon, and perhaps it needs to not be in the centre of the town. Perhaps it needs to be where it should be, in the centre of the community.
Yeah, thank you
and
very
that's
much
a big
for that.
ask, I think, for credit unions, because we like to be in the centre of the town.
Thanks very much for that, Alan, and thank you for Abco for your support. I'd just like to come to Pretty down in Cllr. I know you're not showing at the moment, but if you can unmute. You have a framework of brass which Cheryl's designed a while ago, which is a great idea, but you also talk about loan sharks. Now we do a bit of work around that. Can you flesh out what you're thinking there?
Hello.
Hey, Pretty.
Hi, can you hear me? I was
Yeah,
just struggling with I'm really struggling with the technology this afternoon. I just couldn't unmute myself just now. Hi, so I'm Prissy Gohill from the Public Health team at Cllr Council, and I'm working on the tackling poverty, but also the financial inclusion agenda for the council, but working more closely with Cheryl on a place-based basis. And so, like I said in my chat, that we've got the BRASS framework, which includes things that are protective factors around financial inclusion, financial well-being. Some of the things that we've done today is around raising awareness around things like protective factors around poor lending opportunities and risky lending, so things like loan shark, raising awareness about that. We have previously put in place things like workshops for practitioners working on the ground and at place level to raise awareness about what support there is out there for people that have unfortunately had access to loan sharks and the repercussions of that. But moving forward, we're looking at other things around things like from the pandemic, and also on as a growing trend around harmful gambling. So raising awareness about that, and some training that's available nationally that we can access at a local level. Obviously the food banks, but also kind of accessing affordable food. Unlike Cheryl said about the local food growing projects. So there's a number of things that fall within the BRASS framework, and we also have projects that we work closely with that have make available free school uniform. So that's, and white goods or furniture, etc. So they're all the things that would help families and individuals that either at a crisis point but also want to make their money go further.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. And you guys are doing a great job down there. Ken Smith, Ken, you asked a little bit earlier about the recording. Yes, the recording will be made available so that you can play this back. We'll put it on our YouTube channel as well for people to be able to access. So thank you very much for that, Ken. Just looking across there, Paul and Anne. Paul, you're in Ilkley, as I remember. Is that right?
No, can you hear me?
So, yes, I can. Maybe I got that middle
I wasn't sure whether the mic was working. No, we're in Pontefract.
Ah.
Pontefract has how many food outlets?
We've counted 5 in quite a small town.
Right.
We're one of the 5. And we started about, was it 5-6 years ago?
Yeah.
With holiday food.
Okay.
Originally as part of our local Trussell Food Bank, and then we, for a number of reasons, we became separate. And then in November we started a food club, which was going to be a social supermarket. But it was just at that time that COVID was coming to really bite. We managed to get our premises. It's one of those decisions, should we go for it or not? We went for it, but with a modified model of a food club based on a delivery system. So for £2 a week, we're taking out 4 or 5 bags of basic groceries to our members. At the moment, we're feeding about 50,
over 50
on an estate,
yeah.
One of the estates surrounding Pontefract.
The food's resourced through Fair Share,
Right.
Which is financed through Wakefield MDC,
Right.
through the Food Aid Network. And we have a small grant that helps us with the kind of stuff like long life milk and so on that Fair Share tends not to be able to deliver to us.
Okay.
And we've got a steady clientele. Some 1 or 2 larger families were with us through much of the latter part of the pandemic. But once the schools were reopened, they decided that they didn't need quite so much extra food, so they left. But we have a stream of other people coming on, so it's only a dozen. It's gone up to 13, and that's basically because the 2 of us are running it, and we have to do all the processes.
That's fantastic. How did you hear about this webinar over there in Pontefract?
Oh, through my church, I got onto the Wellsprings mailing list and saw the event advertised, and I said, "This is for us." So here we are.
Oh, fantastic! What I'm going to ask you.
This has been the way forward.
Well, fantastic. Guys, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to ask Julie to put her email in the chat. If you could email her and we can connect with you, that would be marvelous. There's so many other people on here I'd love to. Jane Wearing, can you tell us where you're from and what you do?
Yeah,
I'm picking on people now.
I was worried this might happen eventually. Keeping my head down. Yes, so I work with Sandra, who's also on the call. We run Ilkley Foodbank,
right?
Which we've been running it for, gosh, probably about 2.5 years now. Time has gone in a strange manner with the pandemic, hasn't it? It's kind of expanded and contracted at the same time. So the food bank in Ilkley has been running for about 8 years, totally independent. We don't at the moment partner with any other agencies, Fair Share Trust or anybody else at all. All of our food comes from donations given at Tesco's, Co-op and booths in Ilkley. So that's where we get all our food. And during the pandemic, we set up a GoFundMe page as well. And we've raised money through that as well. And other people send checks and that sort of thing. So we're very lucky in that respect. We haven't had to ask any outside agencies or council funded schemes for anything. We're completely self-sufficient in that sense, as you might expect in a place like Cllr, let's be honest. We support, at the moment, we've got about 40 households on our books. And the way we run currently is that we have a small one of the office buildings at All Saints Church, which they let us use, and we're open 3 days a week for a couple of hours each of those 3 days, and clients come. It's all done in a COVID safe way, etc. at the moment, which is a bit more restrictive, but it's been working. Clients come with their shopping list and we give them what they need, and that's been a good change. We used to do food bags with all set standard things in that they'd come and collect, but there was no choice in that. So we've been able to move on to a process whereby they can come and take what they need. They're not getting more beans than they need, and they can ask, but we get weird and wonderful things in Ilkley. So we, you know, if they want a jar of harissa paste, they can probably get it, or olives and stuff like that. So that's been really nice that they can come and say, oh, well, I prefer that flavour soup to that flavour soup or whatever. And that's how we work at the moment. We're changing things slightly, moving forward. I mean, I like the idea of a food shop type system with, I mean, the credit union and all of that arrangement sounds brilliant. One of the concerns we have is about dependence, and we have got quite a number of clients who've been on our books for several years. Let's be honest about it. That's a concern for us. I think with the pandemic, we've been so focused on just getting through it that we've put everything else on the back burner in terms of how we can better support people. And that's definitely something that we want to look at moving forward. How we do that is a moot question. We don't have a big premises that where we can have people coming in and giving advice, and that's debt counselling. We've not got the space for that at the moment. So we're going to have some interesting times, I think, moving forward when we actually sort of get some headspace and think about those issues, really. But there's some great ideas that have come out of today, so I'm really pleased that we've come on it. Sandra may completely disagree with me, and I'm not speak at all. If she wants to, obviously she can do, but that's kind of where we're at.
What I'd like to just jump through to is we've got In Communities here, Carol Devine. I know you've just joined the marketing team, but Carol, from a In Communities tenancy, can you fill us in on what your view is around Foodbank and food provision?
Hi, Ian. Yeah, this is my third week at In Communities now, so I'm quite new to everything. So I'm just trying to work out sort of where we fit in all of that. I think in terms of obviously probably, I don't know how many of our tenants will be coming to food banks and things like that, but for me it's about how we can reach out to them and let them know about all these things that are available if they don't know, and how we can sort of support them in that process. But I'm just really just learning about all of that now.
Fantastic. We're coming to the end of time here. I would just like Andrew Forsey, thank you for opening in the way you did. We may run slightly over time. If you need to go, please go. But Andrew, I'd just like to get your final comments, what your thoughts are on this webinar, what we've done today, what you've heard, and also about what's going on nationally as we wrap up.
Short answer, Ian, is that I'm in awe of all of the work that has been undertaken and continues to be undertaken by everybody who's contributed to today's meeting. Genuinely, I'm in awe of everything you do. Thank you so much, because you collectively represent such a vital lifeline to so many people. So thank you. And secondly, and just to reiterate how the movement we've begun to pick up today from colleagues who have been providing food and are now open to embracing the food savers model, the pop-up pantry model, the social supermarket model, and so on, is reflective of similar developments across the Feeding Britain network. And we are incredibly determined, as Julie mentioned, to support that movement in whatever way we can across Bradford and Keighley and elsewhere. So again, thank you so much for sharing that work today. Thank God for that work that is being undertaken, and we stand ready to support the next chapter in that work.
Fantastic, Andrew. Right, well, I'm going to wrap it up there. I just want to say a huge thank you for you all coming on and staying through. Thank you for participating at the end and not phasing when I jumped to you. And thank you for that. A huge thank you to Kathy and Wellsprings and the team that have made this webinar happen. And thanks, Josie, for doing a fantastic job of hosting, the Lord Mayor for coming on. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do any of this work. So watch this space. We'll communicate out with the recording. There's a questionnaire coming out as well. Josie, do you want to remind us what that's about? Josie, if you're there.
You're muted.
Oh dear. Yeah, I think Theo's just put the link in the chat bar. So if you can click on that.
It's very quick. Just a couple of things of how you found today and
Really
what sort of
us.
webinars you'd like in the future, and what sort of training we'd be able to provide at Feeding Bradford. So
Will you send it around as an email as well?
It will be in the email with the recording of today's
great.
today's event as well. So don't worry if you don't click on that there.
Excellent. Well, that just leads me to wrap it all up, and thank you again for coming and staying to the end, and we'll be in touch in due course.
Bye everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.